But they are very good flashbacks of a day which is certainly memorable for Jane, but was also memorable for myself as an obstetrician, of being able to work in partnership with a woman to achieve, at least in part, a birth experience which was clearly very much wanted. And in my capacity as the obstetric lead at the Royal London, that is a large and I think a growing part of what I do, is to speak to women who have previously experienced birth trauma and talk to them about, how in the future we can make it better, make it right, put things right in some way, shape or form, and heal the trauma which has gone with a previous difficult birth. And a declaration of interest here is that I myself am a child of a birth trauma. My mother was a caesarean section awareness case, so underwent a caesarean section whilst feeling it, supposedly under a general anaesthetic, which is a thing which was certainly a thing which happened in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And I was aware of that experience growing up as a child. It was talked about in slightly hushed voices between my mother and my grandmother usually. And I was aware that my entrance into the world had been both difficult and traumatic. My mother suffered a postpartum hemorrhage and was unable to see me for the first few days of my life. And when she was able to see me, didn't feel particularly kindly inclined towards this child that had been the source of this terrible trauma which she'd experienced, of being unable to speak during a general anaesthetic whilst in pain. Now, I grew up, went to medical school and I became an obstetrician, but it was probably only when I began my own work with women who had experienced birth trauma that I started to connect the experience of my own family with my choice of career. I hadn't put it together before. I certainly didn't go into obstetrics thinking, I will, put this right for future women. It was only really when I began to listen to the stories of women who had experienced birth trauma that I put it together and thought, maybe on some subliminal level, this is why I chose this career, this is why I do what I do. And the experience of women like Jane, being able to speak to women who've experienced birth trauma about what they would like for the future, is a very powerful one in obstetrics, because what I'm often told is you as obstetricians, you have the power. You are the powerful ones in the room. You enter this space and very good, interrupt that. you enter this space and what you say becomes what happens. A woman loses her power with the incursion of an obstetrician into a birthing space, because an obstetrician is the path through which intervention flows, often. Not always, but often. And in my experience as an obstetrician, I often find, women will come with birth plans, often laminated, often long. But you can tell a great deal about the woman's hopes, dreams, expectations for birth from entering a room. I have walked into a room and discovered that somebody has very lovingly put fairy lights around their bed. And that always speaks to me that this, is an experience which has been thought through, planned, wanted, yearned for. And often the most carefully put together birth plans, the most carefully arranged environments are put together by women who've experienced a previous difficult birth. And that's undoubtedly a theme. And you can, I'm often involved in these conversations beforehand, but for the women who I haven't met in the antenatal period, it's often very clear to me just on walking into a room what the expectations, the wishes are in that room and what we're required to work with. I'm a specialist in breech birth, one of a dwindling number these days, I think. But I remember being asked very clearly by a woman who had previously experienced a challenging birth, who had a breech presentation in a second pregnancy and had opted for a vaginal breech birth. The request was quite simple. It was, keep my space. Keep my space. And we managed it, and this breech baby appeared in a bag of membranes, completely, untroubled by the experience of being born breech. And afterwards, in the debrief after the birth, that space was kept for me and enabled me both to experience what she described as a warrior birth, where she'd been able to do, what she to experience in a way that she felt strong, but also to heal the trauma of a disempowering first birth. And part of what I think is very important about my role these days, and I'll illustrate it in some of the photos that Jane has put up over there, is that you're often surrounded by junior obstetricians. You often have a sort of an entourage following you as you trail around a labour ward of people, And I think, for me, I wonder these days, in the aftermath of many quite devastating reports into maternity, how we as obstetricians continue to encourage and empower junior obstetricians to feel free to respect the choice of women. Because increasingly they are terrified of poor outcomes. They are terrified of, that a baby will be harmed, that they will be punished, but I firmly believe that there is much to learn from providing a woman with information and, supporting them in the power of their choices. And how to continue to do that in obstetrics with all of the challenges that we face today is certainly a challenge, and one which is going to take a lot of patience and time to resolve. But the last thing that I think I would like to say on the back of all of that is these are spaces where women birth. They are transformative spaces. They are the spaces where women become mothers, where parents become parents. But I'm often struck when I particularly walk into an operating theatre. It's called a theatre for a reason, I believe, and that is because they're also performative spaces. And as an obstetrician, I often tell the juniors, your task is to go in, and it is to act like you're on the stage with no clothes on, with complete confidence that you are, going to support this woman to have her baby well. And that is what your role is. It is to imbue parents with confidence, to imbue your team, your wider team with confidence, your anaesthetic team, your theatre team, your midwifery team. It is to imbue them with confidence that you will support this woman to safely give birth to her baby. Because as an anaesthetic textbook that I once read, so if an obstetrician loses it, it's over. It's absolutely over. If an obstetrician starts to panic, then it will infect the entire team, including the mother, including the father, including the entire team. And so these are very much performative spaces for obstetricians, often in difficult and challenging circumstances where adrenaline is high, where people want to shout, where there's fear in the air because something unexpected has happened often, is to walk into that room and imbue it with a strong sense of confidence. And that, I think, is one of the most important roles of an obstetrician, is to bring calm, sense of order and confidence into a room. So that is me. One of them thought about, the importance of birthing spaces, and it's really delightful to see you again.
Yes.
And it's really wonderful actually to see these pictures, because I remember that day extremely well. From a great sense of, feeling your triumph.
Yes.
To also a slight sense of panic in myself over the birth of the second twin. But
well, what you said about the theatre though is fascinating, because Colin, my husband, said Philippa, it's like she was flying a jumbo jet, and she was just totally in control of everything at all times. She just felt like the captain coming over the, over the tannoy and saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could fasten your seatbelts." Thank you very much, Philippa. That was lovely.